Good morning, my name is Jackie McRae. I'm one of the lucky 20 that got awarded a Clinical Doctoral Research Fellowship, and again I started in March this year, so 7 months in. A lot of what I've got to say has probably been said before, but I suppose I'm a bit of a case study really. So, is it? Okay, a little bit about my history. I graduated in 1991, in the dark ages really, from UCL, and that gave me my licence to practice as a speech and language therapist. Following that, it was a bit of a difficult time to find jobs in those days, and I took a sort of joint post doing adults and paediatrics. And at that time, had the opportunity to do some fairly specialist adult acute work at Papworth Hospital, and that really gave me a taste for sort of asking questions. Moved down to London, got married, and did a acute post at St Bartholomew's Hospital. Again, very interesting times when some of the clinical services were being centralised. And over the course of a year, we lost our stroke unit in neurology and neurosurgery. So I moved on to Charing Cross Hospital as a keen junior therapist. And at that point, I remember some of the senior clinicians doing bits of research. And it was very much, you know, as a junior, you did the clinical work and the seniors did the very important research. Quite often it was led by medics, so it wasn't really led by AHPs. And we were encouraged to do little projects, but really didn't really translate into research as such. After a child or two, maybe, I moved up to the suburbs and thought I'd do a nice little community job, but really didn't find it buzzy enough and thought I'd get back into acute work. And it was while I was on my third maternity leave, I applied for the post at the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital, which was a part-time post, covering both paediatric and adult inpatients. Now, this is an orthopaedic hospital. You don't really think that they need speech therapy, but in fact, the post was very unusual. They hadn't had a service there before. And I quickly found out that there was very unusual presentations for some of the paediatrics and the adults in the hospital. I also took on a small research study, which was looking at the impact of anterior cervical spine surgery, so one of their specialist surgeries, and the impact on voice swallowing. That was a lot of work in point one, and again, at that time, I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was keen to have a go at that. As you can imagine, developing a service, there was lots of clinical and service challenges. I managed to increase the post to 0.5, so I was half-time. Developed the service in around 2005, realised that the paediatrics really needed their own speech therapist, so I hived that off, and the rest of my time was just for the adult work. And then in 2009, I grew the service really and added another whole-time equivalent. So during that whole time, I did regular teaching to try and promote what the role, I say we, but it was me plus another one, were doing. Again, getting funding to go to conferences was very challenging, and I found out soon that I would get funded if I presented. So I started submitting abstracts and was successful. So I was able to go to both national and international conferences, often presenting case studies and really wanting to interact and collaborate with other people out there. So that was a fantastic opportunity and one that I'd encourage junior staff to look into. All the time I had clinical questions and looking for evidence, and there's very little evidence in the field. Most of the adults I work with have spinal cord injury or very complex orthopaedic surgery that gives them difficulties with swallowing. So a little bit of background really. I didn't feel that I was the most successful at getting things done. As I said, I did the small research study, but after a year I realised with no supervision and very small data sets, I didn't really complete it and couldn't publish anything. I then considered applying to the Newcastle to do an MSc in speech and swallowing research. So that meant a week, a term up in Newcastle. I got funded for that. I got cover at work. I got cover at home, and I had a fourth child by this point. And a month before it was due to start, they pulled the course. One of the lead lecturers moved to America, so thwarted. Then in 2009, I thought I'd go for some local project funding. Together with a pharmacist, we were looking at the impact of dry mouth on spinal cord injury patients, and we were looking at the value of some of the different saliva stimulation tablets and things. So we thought we'd go for some little project funding locally. And I think the team, the professors at the R&D department found it very interesting. Really, the project funding was to attract millions of pounds after that. And so Obviously, we didn't get the funding, but it started up some dialogue actually between some of the senior researchers, again, mostly medics there, and really trying to help to develop me. And so I was encouraged and told about the NIHR-sponsored MSc in clinical research, which I did apply for, and I qualified with a distinction. So I was very proud of myself. Obviously, I was working part-time, and then half of that was spent studying and juggling a young family. And really, I suppose, looking back at my work as well, you don't have enough hours in your work day. You steal hours from everywhere. So children were still fed and watered and dressed, but you've seen this diagram, obviously. So I'd got on the first rung of that ladder, and although I thought, well, you know what, I'll just get back into clinical practice and forget about those questions, but actually as I was coming to the end of my masters, they were really nagging at me, and I just thought, let me just have a look at that form, those forms. So you've heard about this already this morning. Just to reiterate, obviously open to nurses, HPs and pharmacists this year, full or part-time, again, ongoing clinical development, needs to translate into clinical practice, research project supervisors are new and obviously highly competitive. As you've heard, that's been the process. So traditionally they did a January call, finished in April, shortlisting around July time for an interview around September, October, and then, well, final response, I got it in November. So just some of my tips. Again, a lot of these have already been spoken about. So time, can't tell you. I mean, starting today is a fantastic lead-in to even a January start, but if they're pushing it to March, you've got extra time. Obviously, you've got to compartmentalise your life. You've got family life, you've got work life, and put some time aside every week, really, to have a goal of what you're going to achieve. So you've got to think about your project, who, how, what, when, why. Big decisions to make. Are you going to be full-time, part-time? How's that going to look like? Where are you going to be? Who are you going to do it with? Are you going to be employed by the NHS Trust or by your higher education institute? Who your supervisors are going to be? Again, choose them carefully. I did a whole round of visiting everybody in Queen Square, people in all different universities, and really came back to one of the clinicians, clinical academics that I work quite closely, but I'd at least gone out there and seen who else was around. Again, the RDS were fantastic, so I went to them with a sort of really pathetic little protocol. I don't know what to do, you know, being a clinician, and got a whole variety of advice. Sometimes you just thought, well, they perhaps don't understand what I'm doing, and you go back and clarify that until you start to formulate your idea and know where you're going. Again, training and development has been mentioned, but interesting, on the NIHR website, there's quite an interesting report on where people have failed to be successful. So really, you know, the internet is a fantastic thing. Go and look up what your university is offering for their PhD training or the graduate school training that they have there. Things like King's Fund offer leadership training. There's courses everywhere. And again, as a speech and language therapist, there isn't very much in my specialist area, so sometimes you have to look in other clinical areas and in terms of your academic training as well. As has been said before, your future intentions as well. So it seems really strange when you're applying for a doctoral research fellowship that you're already thinking about the senior lectureship, but you need to think in those terms if you want to demonstrate your success. In fact, I mean, it's quite interesting listening to Peter. I didn't get any feedback from my interview apart from success. And so it's quite interesting listening to you and thinking, oh, okay, maybe I did tick some of those boxes. So, yeah, I think demonstrating that, you know, this isn't just, say, a PhD and you're going to go away, but really you're going to think big. Maybe I think too big. But self-belief, again, that's been mentioned by other people. You know, I dismissed all the little projects and the little developments and the little changes that you make, but actually those are all demonstrate that you're slightly different perhaps than the next person. And again, writing I did this instead of we is little changes in the words make a big difference. PPI, I don't mean to put it low down, it should be high down, but again, like everyone has said, look at the Involve website, really very useful, really approachable. It really should be central to your work. I was very lucky working with an inpatient caseload. I did little groups with my inpatients. I'm now trying to run a group with people who are back out in the community, which is a real challenge actually. They're all wheelchair bound, some of them are ventilator dependent, and so there's challenges involved in that, but I'm actually now visiting them at home, putting a film montage together, so really their voice comes through, talking about why this study is important, and I'll tell you about that study in a moment. Again, finance, it's just like, well, where do you start? As a clinician, you don't think about costs attached to anything, but really everything down to paper, envelope, stamps, through to travelling to meet your PPI group, or even I financed money to pay for carers for them to attend the groups, their transport costs. So really everything, voice recorders if you need those, statistical software, subscription to SurveyMonkey, which I'm using, all those sorts of things, but ask lots and lots of people. So, say preparing for interview, congratulations for getting that far. You then have, the clock starts really, you've got 3 months preparation, which sounds like a lot. Last year this happened over the summer months, so we found out in July through to interview in October, so of course no summer, couldn't do anything. You've got 5 minutes to present your study and your research. How do you cram in your 3-year plan into 5 minutes? It's a real challenge. You need to really think through, what do you include, what do you exclude? What style are you going to use? What information are you going to put in or leave out? You really want to make an impact. Rehearse. Really you need to be practically saying it in your sleep. I could do mine so fast, my children were like, Mom, we can't even understand you. It's like, no, but 5 minutes. But really, you need to, again, I presented to my children, who are fantastic critics, but yeah, exactly. The RDS were fantastic. That was one of the most horrifying mock interviews that I had that evening. I was like, what am I doing? It's terrible. Yeah, the real thing wasn't anywhere near as bad. So I think presenting to people can sometimes be a bit of a walkover. They're all going to be nice to you and they'll ask you a few nice questions. I presented to the head of the Division of Medicine at UCL, he was very nice, but it was very scary. But again, they didn't know anything about my subject, and so they asked me very direct questions, and you realise you've got great big gaps of not making things obvious. So put yourself forward for those mock interviews, and I say the real thing is easier. The 5-minute presentation is followed by a 20-minute interview, which again is quick fire from 14, 15 professors in AHP. And like Peter was saying, be yourself, be very familiar with your application, the strengths, the weaknesses, be prepared to explain how you're going to get through them. You can't have all the answers. They expect this to be a learning journey for you. As I said, mock interviews, and again, believe in yourself and your project. I had quite a long wait. I think in the changeover with NIHR and NHS England, we didn't get confirmation until 6 weeks, which is a really strange time. This was around November time. I was due to start in January, and obviously that wasn't going to happen. I had planned to leave my NHS work and be employed by UCL, and I had to give a 3-month notice period. So I had to move my start date. I then had to think about how I was going to cover my work, which again was quite a challenge. Fortunately, I'd sort of prepped a couple of clinicians all through the year saying, would you be interested in my job if I got this? And actually they came good, and I interviewed 2 and appointed 1. Then starts the whole contractual arrangements. So again, if you've thought about them before, they become a little bit more streamlined afterwards. So if you leave the NHS, some people can do it on a secondment. I did it as a career break, but really our HR department were just completely confused as to how to arrange for an allied health professional to leave their post temporarily and to make that arrangement, because obviously there's no guarantee of employment really, but in fact you need to have that commitment, and that when you come back into your job, you're not on a lesser pay scale than when you left. So I managed to get in contact with another successful applicant and borrowed the wording from one of her contracts. And again, your new contract with the university, they won't treat you with a red carpet. They'll just go, yeah, you're another one of the numbers. Again, my finances didn't come through. The contracts weren't agreed for several months afterwards, which caused some challenges with my student fees and with them allowing me to even be in the department, because you get a letter which was a promise of payment, but they wanted hard cash. But I say we got over that. That's one of your first learning curves. And again, NIHR will review all the finances that you put in there. So again, I put in for an overseas visit. So I'm very fortunate. I'm visiting 6 spinal units. I'm presenting at a conference in Australia and New Zealand. So I've got a 4-week trip coming up. But again, I've got collaborations with research departments out there. I'm presenting at a couple of the universities. That's a place where they're already generating very interesting research in the sort of critical care swallowing field that I'm in. So there's a £5,000 limit for that, but we managed to wriggle around some of the costings. The conference costs went in the conference listing, and some of the subsistence went in other places. So I think it's coming under less than 5,000, but that's a fantastic opportunity if you can do that. While you're waiting between getting your successful outcome and starting, there's a whole ethics and IRAS form to fill in and get through that paperwork. That, again, is a bit like doing the NIHR application all over again. You need to have every piece of paper that you're ever going to use in that. So lots of decisions to be made. GCP training is now needed for everyone. I'm not doing an intervention study, but I need to get my GCP training. And again, that covers you for 3 years. But again, you probably should do it within a year of you doing any data collection. Again, really valuable. I was in clinical practice, didn't really know many people in the wider research area apart from within my clinical area. So an opportunity to network with people, tell them what you're planning to do, get them involved. Again, I love sending emails out to people, sending out flyers. I've visited some other spinal units and promoted the study. You can do some sitting down and doing some of your literature search as well, which again should be the preliminary bit of work for your study as well. And as I said, the NIHR will review your contract, get the finances sorted out, signatures and payment going, and that might happen after you start. So a little bit about my project. It's called the DAISY project. Everyone loves an acronym, so I'd encourage that. There's an acronym generator online, actually, which stands for dysphagia following acute cervical spinal cord injury. So I'm looking at the clinical decisions that are made by a multidisciplinary team within intensive care regarding swallowing, nutrition, respiratory management, with the aim of developing a swallow screening tool. So that would be my output, really, at the end of the study, which will translate into changing clinical practice, hopefully within less than 5 years, really. As part of that, I'm doing an online survey to staff, doing some patient interviews, a Delphi consensus, and again I'm recruiting experts from internationally really for that, and doing some preliminary validation of the tool. I've got a little patient advisory group, and that again has been fantastic. Like you found, they're almost a support group for each other, because most of these patients go out to the community and live very isolated lives. So they're really keen to put something back in to a system, and if that translates into change. So that's been a really fantastic aspect of the study. And again, the fellowship role for me was a really fantastic opportunity to go out and expand my role. I've become a member of the Intensive Care Society AHP committee. So again, that's a really small committee. But we're trying to, again, incorporate AHP and change within quite a medical field. And there's been opportunities teaching and promoting our role and within research for the Intensive Care Society. So that's a fantastic opportunity. Again, I've looked into becoming an Royal College of Speech and Language Therapist advisor. Again, as a clinician, you don't really have very much time to do some of these things. So I've sort of been released from some of that role and doing that. I'm really enjoying mentoring some people for the masters, and again, people who are considering the fellowship. And again, as I said, building up some future collaborations in this area. And you can have a look at my project. I've done a little website there. So big thank you to my tolerant family and my colleagues and my patients at the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital have been fantastic, and at Northwick Park. And my supervisors are Dr. Anton Emanuel and Christina, and my clinical supervisor is Rick Fox at RNOH. So thank you. My emails are up there, but don't flood me with questions. This is just my experience, but yeah. Thanks.